Okay, welcome to this playlist on the subject of Delle Istorie del suo tempo, blah 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 blah. First part, 1581. This is going to be quite interesting and go into some new sort of territory. This book came to me in a disbound state, but the binding, though separate from the rest of the book, is actually in very good condition in itself. Very robust condition, actually, but it is separate. The text block is broken into four major pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, together with two gatherings that I've already sort of just taken the opportunity just to gently repair. So we've basically got 6 major sections and 2 gatherings making the text block. And you know, if you take this all together, it is complete, which is obviously a great sign. So the sort of aggregate of these 6 items together sit in here, but there's absolutely nothing holding all of this together. So there is an argument for saying, just leave it as it is. You know what? It's fine. It's together. It's complete. Just leave it as it is. I think I want to have a go, really just as a learning thing, at connecting this all together. But there are several challenges that I haven't faced before, so it's going to be an interesting learning journey. So the first thing is vellum. Vellum terrifies me. It's a unique material. It behaves in many ways very differently to leather. I really worry about the notion of ever getting any kind of fluid on this and how the vellum might respond. I also, if you see my other restorations, you'll have seen that, you know, I merely sort of drill holes in boards and then put a nice section of leather over the spine and so on and so forth. None of those options are available to me here because this is actually in good shape, and I really don't want to start punching holes up and down here and covering this. Now, the other thing is, this is not just made of vellum. So while there's this vellum section here, if we start on the outside first, you can see this sort of marbled zone here. Now, when I first got this, I thought, okay, this is a book from 1581, but, you know, during the 1700s, somebody had a go at doing a restoration, and what we have is a strip of vellum at the back and some nice marbled paper sort of covering this. I don't think that's right. The first thing to say is, and this is difficult to convey, but this is actually an extremely light and extremely robust material. It does not feel like your typical thick cardboard that you would get in a book that's been restored in the 18th century. There are several indications of that. First off, the corners are in incredibly good condition. Now, any book from the 18th century that's been made of the typical sort of board and paper materials, these corners will get bumped and they'll fray pretty quickly. So for this to be in this condition kind of says this isn't paper. And as I sort of look more closely at it and listen to it and the way it sounds and everything else, everything about this is telling me that this surface here is actually vellum. But it's vellum that's been marbled. I've never seen that before. This is an enigma to me, frankly. And if there are any book experts or book historians who can comment on what this is and give any insight on it, I'd really welcome that. I sort of had a pick away here, there, and that is more robust than paper. That's definitely a vellum, I believe. Now, interestingly, there's a label here which is also vellum. So that kind of says to me that this binding probably does not date from 1581. This is an original, but this label may well be. I suspect this has probably been recycled from the original binding. If we look inside, things get even more complicated. So you have the sort of vellum spine folding over here. But then the first thing to say is we've got this book plate. Now this book plate here, I believe, is the House of Lusignan, which was the royal family that ruled several places, but Cyprus, Armenia, some parts of what is modern day Italy as well. But I believe that's what that crest is. So this is probably a very, very old book plate. Now, the book plate, the sort of things can only be stuck down in sequential order, and that book plate is completely undamaged. So this obviously, you know, is younger than what's underneath it, which is this paper. And then underneath the paper, you have this very sort of primitive card. It's almost like a papier-mâché. It has very rough sort of wood fibres in it. And this is sort of one big piece has sort of been folded down. Then interestingly, you have this material here. Now this, honestly, I wasn't sure what this material was here. I think it's another layer of card, but it appears to me quite a bit more robust than this. So at first I thought it was a piece of vellum manuscript, but I don't think it is. I think it's a piece of cardboard that's, you know, been made separately and probably to a much higher standard. I suspect the mix of pulp that was used for this is somewhat different, whereas this is a very low, sort of low grade cardboard. And then, you know, so basically you have three pieces of vellum here. The main structure of the board is provided by this cardboard that's, you know, a sheet of card reinforced with two sheets of separate card inside. And then the whole lot's been sort of got some sort of rough paper as a paste down covering everything, and then the book plate's gone on. So that's how the this was actually put together. Now, where it gets really weird is when we look at how the text block was sewn into this. So if we bring over the text block. Okay, so we can see we've got 4 relatively slender raised bands. And those appear to tie in with what looks to be 4, I'll just say here, over here so I can lean it, 4 sections of hemp. There's one sort of, you can just see its outline here, one's visible there, another there, and there's one at the bottom as well. So, you know, that kind of says, okay, there was probably hemp threaded through these here, and then that was tied in, sort of just glued in by the look of it onto the face of the cardboard, like so. That doesn't, though, ring true either, because I think that there's an earlier aspect to this as well, and that's because if you look very closely at the text block, you can actually see signs of a previous sewing. So here, this looks like the holes of a previous sewing of what would have been a tail band. Then another raised band here, one in the middle. It's a bit difficult to see, but I'm pretty sure there's one. You can just about see it here at the edge, yes. There we go. One there. And then you can just about see the trace here of what would have been a headband. Now that's a pretty classical way that a book from the late 1500s or early 1600s would have been sewn. So to give an example from my collection, you know, how you would basically tie in a vellum book is you'd do it in, you know, 5. So you basically have one there, here, 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 one at an angle up there. And the pattern of these holes suggests that this text block was originally subject to the same thing. So I guess what I'm saying is this book originally would have looked very similar to this book. But at some point relatively early in the book's life, I think, that binding failed. And it was redone to look like this. Now, I did look sort of, if you look more closely at some of the threading and twine, if we open a text block and get to the middle of a gathering so we can actually have a look at the thread. Here we go. See you there? You know, it's quite a fine twine and it's very difficult to age. You could almost be persuaded into thinking that actually is quite modern. Although if it's been tied into this, and this has been tied into this, which has then gone underneath that book plate, that would suggest not. Unless, and there is another possibility here, there's been a previous restoration attempt and this was somehow connected by a knot or something else to this, whatever, this, which is tied together by a knot or something. And if that happened, that would clearly explain why a repair of that way, you know, didn't last very long at all and, you know, sort of fell apart. So anyway, so lots to think about here. I do want to preserve this external look. I don't want to damage any of this vellum. So I can't go merrily punching holes directly through here. What I can do is I can put some, you know, reinforce the, you know, consist of these raised bands by sewing them in along here and then potentially follow the path laid in by this, by these sections of hemp here underneath. So I'd be using existing holes or maybe putting some new holes in the cardboard, but not damaging the vellum. The other constraint here is I really don't want to damage the book plate. So I've only got a limited zone in which to work along here, which, you know, I could, in theory, I could put holes in this card. I could maybe put holes in this material here to hold new pieces of twine. But then I'd need to cover it in a nice way here, in such a way to secure the book, like so. So this is going to be really quite tricky. I need to come up with a repair that's going to be robust enough to hold the weight of what is a big text block, but at the same time do so in a way that only uses this cardboard and leaves this text block leaves the book plate intact and the vellum intact. So that's going to be the challenge. So my first approach is going to be to do the bit that we know we need to do, regardless, which is I'm going to sister these raised bands, which basically means just using bits of thread to put a new section of twine across here, just with some knots that tie into those existing remaining sections of raised band there. We'll sew the reinforcements directly in to these two gatherings, which are loose. And then that'll give us a position where we can then put a nice piece of fabric over here and then stabilize this text block as one unit again. So that's going to be the first step. And then the really interesting part is going to be, is there a way in which we can then tie in at both the twine and glue in the fabric in such a way that we're underneath this cardboard, not damaging the vellum, not damaging the book plate, and in such a way making the repair as inobtrusive as possible. So, lots to do.